Hi, it's Grzegorz Godlewski from the Artistry of Code podcast. Welcome to the lucky 13th episode of the show, to which we've invited a friend of ours, Jarosław Wiśniewski from the Viessmann R&D Center. Personally, I was really looking forward to hosting him on the show because I truly admire his approach to building software and working with other people. Together with Jarek, we talked about why long-term projects and engagements are really awesome. And we did it by sharing several valuable experiences, lessons learned, and actionable tips which you might want to pick up right away. So without further ado, let's go! Welcome to the Artistry of Code podcast, where we, together with our guests, are seeking ways of doing things right and having fun with it.
Software, architecture, soft skills, teamwork, and other crazy buzzwords.
Are you ready? Let's bring more value to the business.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Artistry of Code podcast. Today we're hosting our next guest, who is Jarosław Wiśniewski, and we're going to call him Jarek for short because that's the short version of Jarosław in Polish. This time, because that's the second time that we're trying to record this, we're connecting over the internet. Last time we were at the Viessmann R&D Center office. Unfortunately, we're not the best sound engineers and a couple of things went wrong. So we had to re-record this. So here we are for the second time. The first time you will never hear. It's just going to be some sort of like a mystery for you guys. But then again, yes, welcome once again. We're here together with Jarek and Artur. Please guys say hello to our listeners.
Hello.
Hello.
Jarek is working as a technical lead and an architect on the mobile section of the customer applications, mostly on the Android part of the stacks, and the flag application, which is developed by Jarek and his teams, is Vicar. But that's going to be actually all which I'm going to say. Now, Jarek, it's time for you to introduce yourselves to our listeners. So give us a bit more information on yourself. Perhaps how did you enter IT or some, like turning points in your career?
Hi all. So some time passed since I started. Basically, I started at a time when probably even Google didn't exist yet. It was around 98. And at that time, I started from a course of C++ language, which I got from my friend on floppy disk. So I even didn't have internet, nothing. And that actually was the beginning. And I really enjoyed that. Everything started from that time. I stopped playing games. I started writing code, etc. After some time, I started to commercialize that knowledge. But when I was not experienced, that was really funny to work weeks for salary, which was enough to buy a dinner in a restaurant. but of course later it was more profitable. I started from PHP. That was my first commercial project, and we helped a school to build a system which allows students to subscribe to courses. It was quite of an experiment. The program where they run it a bit different than other schools. So they needed also custom software. So we helped with that. Later, I worked on desktop applications, also on the mobile. But at that time, around 2008, mobile applications meant more Java mobile edition than Android, iOS, etc. As we know. Yes, that was the beginning. And I started later truly commercial work, which was not related to startups and my own project. It was around 9 years ago, I think. It was a company which developed medical software. So it was for me a huge leap from experimenting with something, working with other freelancers, to start to work really with people who were professionals in their domain. So also I entered a time in the company when they struggled to qualify for ISO, quality management for mobile devices. That was really a huge transition for the company that when passed allowed the company to sell medical software also to USA, etc. So that was really nice. And it's hard to find a reason, but I also changed the job to Viessmann. It was around 8 years ago. That's nice history because through that 8 years, and it's quite long in our industry to work for one company. Basically, I work on the same thing all the time. So I work on a mobile application, as Grzegorz mentioned. It's a Vicar application dedicated for our end customers. Maybe it's good to clarify. It's Vicar now. It also changed names. Basically, it always was a project, which was an application dedicated for end customers. And just it also had different names in the past. So in the past, we also changed code base, started from the scratch. And I think that's nice history also how it ended, what was hard, what was easy for us. But yes, I think we'll try to explore that later. And as an introduction of my career, I think it's almost okay. Maybe it's also good to mention about my latest efforts, which are related to projects which I do after a regular job. So after I started to work for a company which created medical software, and also when I work for Viessmann, job ends at some time, and then you have time for your hobbies, etc. So my hobbies were often traveling with my wife on mountains, especially. But I also, when I not travel, so on that free time I have in front of my computer, I always try to do something special, something extra, some kind of software, some applications which I invented, and then try to realize my ideas. So also I have some projects which were created like that. And that I think it also helped me a lot to learn, because normally in job, you have specific tasks, you are maybe more constrained. When you have some free time and you can do everything, then it helps to really to do what's important for you, and then it's easier to remember and easier to learn new things.
You got me very interested into this application for students to reserve courses for the next period of time. Was it designed to work with for Wrocław University of Technology?
Maybe I also did a mistake in wording. Basically, it was high school, so I shouldn't say students, probably.
Oh, that's a pity. Because I remember in Wrocław University of Technology, there was actually some kind of race when they introduced the system for courses reservation, and I thought that it was quite a demanding task, to implement a tool that would allow people to sign on to courses they preferred, because the start of reservation was always at the full hour. For example, start at 10 a.m. and in 5 seconds the system was down and you could do nothing. So I thought that maybe you had some brilliant idea how to make it work.
So I worked for fourth high school from Zielona Góra, so it was a bit different story. But yes, it was not easy, and that system's really, it's quite complicated when you go into details. And we are still not experienced. We were just starting, so for us it was, oh my God, how hard it is.
That's a good start. Yeah, that's a good start for a developer.
I really like the fact that you also started with PHP. That's a common ground on this call, really. At the very beginning, it actually allowed to get that kickstart. And I also recall that past reality in Poland where we were building up projects in PHP for starvation rates. So like buying a dinner or a new backpack after finishing a couple of weeks long project was something really typical. So I'm very glad that we all ended up in a different reality nowadays, and I guess a lot of our listeners do so as well. But then again, we've met today to talk about the lessons learned from working over 8 years on the same product. Perhaps let's start with the first question. Jarek, what are the most important lessons which you would point out from, like working over 8 years on the same product, which is the same product by the name, but internally it turned over a couple of times, didn't it?
Exactly. That's the important stuff that when I started, it was currently a time when we were maintaining quite legacy code. After some time, we switched to completely new code base. Then we started to use that name Vicar. And it was a time when we tried to build a new application using exactly the same backend infrastructure. But it was, let's say, just a lesson how to switch to a completely new system. So right now, currently, we still use that name Vicar, but it's yet another code base, which also is connected to a completely new implementation of all the backend infrastructure. We had some times when we could see how our customers react, how it's perceived when we change UI, when we change applications, code base, and what side effects it can have. So I think the most important lesson learned is that when you change too much, it's always too much for your users. So You can spend months on research how the UX should look like, how to implement that stuff, how to make it more robust in terms of technology. So that should give you more for the future, to extend that, to make that tool even better in the future, but also how to make it easier for users. Yes, but then you push that to production, and then you see that you could have a user, and that user yesterday used one application, now has, 5 seconds to change temperature in his home, and bam, it looks completely differently. Or bam, it informs him that he would need to download another new application, and then he could accomplish his stuff. So I think I have also a comparison to my wife. She's an accountant. They use such awkward software for me. The UX is so, I completely don't understand it, yes, but when you have a accountant with years of experience, the latest thing they want is to change that UI, yes, because they are experienced in that. So when you think about changing things, you always need to remember your users, which current state is actually their world. So if you change something, they always need to learn something new, and maybe they don't have time, maybe they don't have mod. And always when you change things, there is also place for new bugs. So that's also a risk. You also have deadlines, so you can cut a scope a bit. So it's also common, yes, that you had great ideas how to implement stuff or how it will look like. Then we have also some delays, some issues. Then we cut scope a bit, and then final product can be different for those users, but also a bit cut, let's say, so can miss some functionality. So we also had that issues, and it was really hard next month to reintroduce missing things, to fix bugs, and to regain trust from users that it won't change such much in the future.
Yeah, so we could hear that this had some impact on users. Can you tell us if, because there was 3 different code bases, but the very same name for the application, which is Vicar, was those transitions between code bases visible to user? If it was visible, how they reacted and how you dealt with it?
Yes. So we had the 3 code bases. Users need to switch application one time. So they could have old application named Vitotrol, and at some time they was asked to switch to new one. And yes, that actually was connected to the most negative comments when users had to do that, and that new application had completely different design. Yes, so it was for sure that large learning curve users needed to pass through. If I would think about such transitions in the future, I think that nice example is to compare, let's say, Windows operating system from Microsoft and Mac OS from Apple. Mac OS was free from quite a long time ago in the past. So system can update, you even don't see a difference mostly. But over time, when you compare screenshots from the operating system and its application from few years in the past, you see, oh, wow, how much it changed. But I even didn't notice that. When you have Windows, when in the past you had to buy every new iteration, it has to have something to just justify in your mind. Yes, I spent money and it changed a lot. UI is completely different. So changing UI probably is the best way, even if internals in Windows mostly were the same. But changing UI, it really helps to see a difference. Yes, and it's easy to marketize because you can have screenshots, movies on that new UI. And in our case, application was free.
So what would be your general recommendation, for let's say our listeners are building an app and they are about to introduce some sort of a bigger change when it comes to the application, and everybody would like to kind of, avoid that unexpected impression, how we should deal with that, with this sort of a changes?
Mm-hmm. So try to be iterative. I think Scrum really provides a lot of good practices, and all that sprints and try to work with iterations is with a reason to also not only to help developers to introduce things one by one, but also for our clients to see that iterative changes of the product. And then it's easier to adjust when only some things changed. But of course, sometimes you just have old infrastructure and you need to switch to something new. And that probably wouldn't be a nice idea to implement new product with old interface just to don't make that huge difference for users. So we also tried, but I think it's a good idea to try to, when you know that old software will be abandoned and you will switch code base, try to adjust a bit that old software. So introduce some iterative changes, which will try to fill some gaps from that new software. So, okay, maybe you will have old style, old colors, whatever, but maybe you can introduce kind of visual refactoring to help users then to switch to new software. Or we can also connect that with marketing campaign, etc. Yes, so there's a lot of stuff you can do to inform users in front, so they won't be surprised. Rather, as Apple and other companies do, try to marketize stuff, so users just wait for that. They are impatient because they would like to see that new stuff, yes? Not introduce something as a surprise.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about how to prepare users for the change, act upfront. What about the users that are not willing to switch? Because keeping two applications working at the same time with the very same feature set is, first of all, very difficult. Second, probably very not cost effective. So do you have some things from your experience that could help do the transition in some organized way that will not affect the user satisfaction and will not cost it that much?
That also was cost on our side. Our old application and infrastructure also, they had to be in the production for some time. Yes, for sure, it's additional cost, but we don't see it as much as developers. I also was not as involved. Maybe it was more for business to carry that cost and for DevOps, yes, to also maintain that older infrastructure. Fortunately, from my side, it was rather transparent. We switched to the new product. I didn't feel that cost, but for the company, for sure it was so. But how to avoid that? I don't have a nice idea. Yes, it was rather not that my point of expertise.
This is something that didn't pop up in our conversation today, which is the fact that the change of the UI was coming to the users because of a total shift in the way we would like to represent the equipment, right? Because the old application, this is something which might be known to our listeners or not, was really resembling the UI of the HMI, so human machine interface, so the display on the actual heating appliance, right? So you as a customer, you were able to see the same controls or buttons or nearly the same as they were on your device at your basement, for instance. So the mobile app was pretty much resembling this. But then again, the new times and the new design principles came in. Essentially, the user interface, user experience has been born since those many years, and then the idea came in. So essentially, we ended up with switching the UI in the apps totally. And this the example which you gave, Jarek, in regards to the accountants. That these people are used to work with hardcore software, which is looking like a one big table with buttons. And this is doing perfectly everything which they need to do because they understand the world in tables pretty much, right? So that was frankly the same for our users when it comes to the heating appliances.
Yes, I think that's also nice that for accountants, usually things don't change much and often. But usually not always.
So far.
So far, exactly.
Now it's changing twice a year.
Yes, in Poland we have that.
Yeah, the taxing law is on a run right now, so we're having unexpected changes on the level of the law, and then all the apps have some time to catch up on this.
I will track if software changes also for my wife. Then. But I have interesting remarks here, according what you told lastly about that. That's also really interesting aspect of that application we work on because. And also it has some technical problems which need to be resolved then. So I think it's interesting to exploit that, I think, a bit. Case is that, yes, that Vicar is one application, and then company like Viessmann creates more and more devices over time. And those devices have their own HMIs, so we named that displays on devices, which their own user interface. So then you have some devices, yes. Then you create application, you create UI to match them. Then you have more and more devices with different screens. Approaches change. Previous approach, we tried to implement an application to match this on devices. And idea was to simplify things for users, that they have the same ideas on the application and on devices. But when devices were so different and changed over time, and in terms of Viessmann, that life cycle of a device, it can be like 20 years. Yes, it's not something you replace often, like heating boiler. And also a company changed from a company which produced mostly heating devices to a company which produces more and more just IoT stuff. Various sensors and actuators are in the offer. So application also had to change from approach when we displayed one heating circuit to application which actually has entire dashboard of things which you can have in your application. If our listeners know other applications like SmartThings from Samsung, for example, then you can imagine how complicated it must be to support various kinds of devices and how UI needs to be, how it needs to evolve to present everything and help user to see entire home.
Yeah, so the whole thing pretty much fits into the word scalability, right? Because the old approach of representing stuff within the application wasn't really fitting to the reality yet to come, right? So we started to offer more products, then more solutions. We started to integrate third-party products, and we really had to switch that UI in order to really accommodate all the new stuff which is out there on the market. Okay, so the first lesson, which I kind of will summarize here, is that we shouldn't make surprises to our users, but as you guys can hear, these are not entirely avoidable, especially when like the current design or the current idea behind the application changes heavily, because it has to in order to accommodate new pieces of business. Jarek, what's the next lesson learned from those 8 years?
Internally, when we implement a new system, we always have that ideas that it will be so easy to start from the scratch, that we have that complicated old infrastructure, backends, applications, and then we'll start from scratch and everything will be easy because we will leap through all the tech debt and life will be just easier. And then teams start work and then magically deadlines come and we realize that okay, maybe it was not so easy. Maybe we had to implement more than we planned. We forgot about few things changed. So I think that generally we should always have respect for old software, which was years on the market, because it has years of experience of really hundreds of people inside. So it's not so easy to switch big systems to new ones. So it always will be complicated and long-running ideas. So tasks. So I think that the lesson learned was also to know that, yes, to have a bit of a respect to older software, also to refactors, because it's easy to start a refactor, but it's hard to finish it without making bugs and making things worse. So to have that confidence in refactors, it's always good to have good implementation of tests. So for example, when we write unit tests and every time when we refactor something, and we need to spend more time on fixing tests than code which we refactored, probably something is wrong. Probably that unit tests are too much details from the implementation. Maybe we test methods like they are ideas to test private methods which we expose, especially for tests, etc. So probably then we go too deep. It's rather a good idea to test on interfaces, on public methods, try to be as generic as possible. Then more and more refactors will come without huge changes in tests. So that's also nice to remember. To firstly, when you go to refactor something, to switch code base or whatever, just to improve existing one, firstly ensure we have tools to verify that we won't break things. So at our company, at Viessmann, we try to unit test things. We have integration tests with other layers, but of course, always it would be good to have more of them. Yes, it's always not ideal. We also have manual tests and test cases, which we do before every release. There is a few layers, also code review, yes, but it's actually standard right now. We even introduced lastly code review by 2 developers to make it more robust to find any issues. Basically, I am not sure if it's good or bad idea. We have still discussions in the team, but we try what we can to have as many layers of verification as possible, as the refactors actually they happen all the time.
Jarek, you have given us at least 2 good points on lessons learned from migrating from between those code bases. Let's have a hypothetical situation that in some random application there is a requirement to rebuild a lots of stuff. What guidelines or like list of points to check would you give to our listeners to decide if this change should be performed either by refactoring, like gradual change, or a big switch, like changing from making old application legacy and starting with completely new project.
I think that generally before we go into that thing to decide if we should start from scratch with new code base, etc., I think there is one important thing we need to do all the time. Every change which we introduce to the system, we should try to make it better, not worse. So if there was some technical debt, try to fix even a bit on every layer. So when I'm a developer on the lowest possible level, so I'm completely not interested in requirements. That's what I mean. I just got a task and need to implement it. I always, when I see some parts of code, I can try to think on what I can improve, what I can simplify, even if it's not exactly directed to my task. Of course, I shouldn't do huge refactors which change things and introduce possibility of bugs, but when I see small things which I change either or they are really close, personally, that's my approach. I always try to make the things around a bit better. And when everybody on every layer do that, the same when we think about requirements, we try to fill some issues which we know from the past, then we have a good chance that we will never have that issue that we need to start from scratch. When we at some level stop doing that, so we have developers who maybe some parts of code are quite complicated, so they bypass them, leave that code and implement something from scratch in second place. Then we start to have similar requirements implemented in different places a bit differently. The same can happen for UX teams, which maybe they lose control on components in the application and will propose similar screens but on completely new components, so without even marking. They are kind of components like styles of buttons, etc., which we can use. Then everything starts to be disconnected from code which we implemented in the past. The same with requirements. Yes, when we have analysts and they need to think on new requirements and they lose control of past ones and don't try to reuse some concepts. Like, for example, we have sensor temperature and we need to format it somehow. So we can have general rules how to format sensors or temperature sensors in the application, or we can completely forget about that unified rules. And every time when we have the same problem to how to format that, we can define new rules because new designer will work on that, new analysts and the new developer, and they completely won't reuse past stuff. Then the system starts to be so complicated, then really thinking about implementing it from scratch goes from the fact that we are slower and slower and slower. And we probably recruit more and more developers, and it's even slower. So then the management proposes even to maybe it's a good idea to start from scratch because we see that there is so much tech debt that you can't continue. So first, what I would suggest is always try to avoid that writing things from scratch. Because if you do that one time, probably you will do another time. If reason was that you had too much tech debt, because if your teams were able to create that tech debt one time, probably they do exactly the same second time. So we will never be able to just go forward because we will always start from scratch and then land in that situation that you have too much tech debt. So try to avoid tech debt, fix tech debt as possible. When you really need to switch to new software, are those leaps in requirements that you realized that application, that system which you developed actually doesn't meet users' needs, or things change so much, your products change so much that you would need to introduce so many changes in that system that you can even start from scratch because there is no point to reuse previous one. So my suggestion would be to think on switching code base when you have that leaps in requirements, in approaches. In Viessmann, in that situation, we really connected that with entire replacement of backend infrastructure. So that allowed us to switch to tools and solutions, which right now helps us to implement a lot easier than before. Yes, but this is also your area of expertise, so you also know better than I what exactly were benefits of that switching to new infrastructures.
I think the case, is fairly similar with what we've said about the UIs in the Vicar application, that at some point the current system is not expandable, not in terms of the code base, but it's not expandable in terms of the business capacity, right? So, or business capabilities. So if you would like to provide some more fine-grained services, more tailored services, then these sort of refactorings or changes or rewrites do happen, right? I recall, when we had that microservice boom a number of years ago, everybody started to apply different design principles to the systems. So we started to build up more business or capacity oriented services. And if you have a couple of legacy systems in your platform, then you probably will need to replace some pieces of them, cut something out and move it somewhere else in order to make this happen. But then again, it doesn't always have to be in the big bang style, right? And I think what can be also quickly added here is that the risk related to people and exchanging of those people, you know it best after working 8 years at the very same company, that the turnover when it comes to the people on board can be considerably big. So at some point, people who are working on the previous version of the application, they are no longer there at the company at some point. And the knowledge that, as Artur calls it, a tribal knowledge, is disappearing along with the people, and not all the requirements are set in stone in a system.
I see that issue in a few aspects. For example, it's beneficial for the project, for the company, when you have that people which work a bit longer, because they have that generic knowledge. They begin to be that experts in their domain because they just sync with all that knowledge, which from hundreds of or thousands of implemented tasks. So they always can help others to understand things, or on refinements, they can help to grasp some issues which are hard to be seen by newer team members. So that's really a huge benefit for the company.
Yeah, I have funny story about it, about this tribal knowledge and people who are longer in company. Once I was working on some web application, and there was a button that was troublesome, and I remember that with time the button has been put lower and lower in the UI. When you look at the screen, it was lower and lower with another change of requirements. And with time also the people that decided to replace it elsewhere also changed. And we as developers working longer have seen actually a cycle of this button, because in the end someone decided, why is it in the bottom bar? It should be on the top. And this way we had a full cycle of button coming coming lower and lower.
Your story made that issue even more interesting, I think. And exactly, so there's so many aspects when you have that changing people in teams. For example, from my experience, I also have seen that cycles, even maybe even not connect, but also connected to the requirements. But I also see that on a level on workflows. So we decide what's good, what's bad for our teams on retrospections, etc. And there's a lot of cycles because teams change, and then new people propose the same ideas we tested like 2-3 times. And the best things are that I can be biased a bit as a person who works so long, because I can say that it won't work because it won't work before. But what's nice in that in new team, when people changed a bit, situation changed a bit, times changed, it can be that approach which didn't work before maybe will work now. So I would say that even sometimes there are benefits that you work long and you have the domain knowledge, but you also need to try to be flexible to don't deny everything because you tried everything, but with different people and with different conditions. So that's important also to remember.
We fluently went to a next point of our conversation, which is about working so long on a single project. We started with some stories and from our experience. So tell us, what are, in your opinion, pros and cons working so long with a single product?
I think a big positive side for me personally is that when you work long for one company and you're a person who likes to propose ideas, etc., and most developers like, because we are people who try to find solutions for things. So when you work short, you can propose a lot, and then you change a company. So you completely have no that feedback loop. You don't know if those ideas were successful or not. So in next company, you do exactly the same. And you even remember, and that can amplify your ambitions, that I proposed that lastly, and actually there was no negative feedback. So you proposed that probably new company. But in fact, that old company might struggle at the moment due to your decisions or proposals, but you don't see that. And so for me, that's really important to stay and see what's the outcome. And I'm so long that I can see outcome of decisions which made another decisions which also had outcome. So for me, if I would change a company, I would feel like I would need to start everything from the scratch. Yes, and in that place, I'm in that chain of decisions, which also a lot of them were mine or because of me, and they are good and bad ones. Yes, so you also can learn on that, and over time, you know what would be or what didn't work. So you try to avoid the situations. So it's really helpful, in my opinion, to self improve yourself. So all the times when you hear that in your company you will have that new opportunities to evolve, etc. Mostly in your previous company you also will have, because that company doesn't sit in the place. Yes, of course it's not always the same. Yes, in Viessmann we have that situation that things change all the time, so it's hard to be bored. But of course I believe there are companies which may be stuck at some place, or atmosphere is not that good as it should be. So probably it depends on the company. But if everything works in your company, then I think personally for you it can be really beneficial, because you can see that outcome of your past decisions.
So that's about the feedback loops. Do you see any other pros and or cons of working so long on a single product?
So cons, maybe drawback can be, as I tried to tell before, right, that I can be biased a bit by past situations which I remember were in this company, but maybe they are not current anymore. So you need to try to be aware on that. Yes, and when you hear too much or a lot of complaints from others that we should try that because they feel that they are new and they would like to try, it's good to let them try. Yes, and maybe even if you know what will happen and the rest of the team don't know, it's like with children. Yes, we can tell them what's good, what's bad, and mostly they will listen, or sometimes they will listen, but also there are things they need to experience, because otherwise they won't be so convinced that those are good or bad ideas.
I think you've just covered one of the. I'm not sure whether that's a pro or a con, but what I read from what you just said, and I kind of feel it as well as a person who's working here for like 5 years, is that it teaches you patience. Because at some point, if you're going to have those new team members and they will be coming in with some ideas without like knowing how that's going to play with the organization, how that's going to play with the product, you have to let them learn. And then we, as specifically when we were working in the leadership roles, that's actually one of the things which is very inherent here, is that we help people to grow and we have to give them occasions to learn. And sometimes allowing somebody to check something when it's not having like a big negative impact just for the sake of learning, that's also one of the things which you really don't have when you're going into a new company, right? We are getting trusted over the years of working in one place, and this helps out to build up that sort of like a personal brand within the organization, which opens a couple of things.
That also helps, yes. That also helps. But you also helped me to see one other issue. The case is that when you propose those solutions, or maybe when newcomer propose some refactor solutions, maybe new tools, new dependencies which could be used, then you have that issue. When you have bigger project, it's not always a good idea to use every new tool in beta, some experiments or tools which are not quite popular, because it's always a risk for a big project. Yes, and then you have also that layer that newcomer tries to test you or test his ideas and would like to propose some change. And it can be seen that you are that older person which don't like changes. But from other side, you try to keep the huge project consistent. So you can't allow every refactor and introduction of every new tool. So sometimes it also requires some clarifications and maybe more discussions to explain deeply why we can't do everything. And it's also connected to the fact that sometimes you can have developers who propose those new tools, let's say in maybe not popular ones or really new ideas which are evolving, but they are not mature enough to introduce into a huge complicated project. And then those people can, even if you allow them to do that, they can leave the company before you see outcomes. So we come back to that previous topic that you try to have good relations and allowed to do something, new people to increase their morale and help them to feel that they introduce something to the project, and then they leave before you really get issues because of that new tools and the fact they have bugs, etc.
Okay, Jarek, because you kind of also started to talk about this, and that the third point which we have for our agenda today, which is what helps to keep people on board, in your opinion.
I think the best is when we are happy from the fact that we work together. So when we have teams which try to solve problems, they cooperate with each other. Integration parties also help. Work from office helped a lot. When we started to work mostly remotely due to pandemic situation over the world, I have seen situations we got a new team member. Really, I believe it was a nice person and we could cooperate, but that person just felt disconnected. Yes, because it was a person who liked to keep contact with others, etc. And it was not the same. And that person remembered from office work. And I wonder, yes, so we need somehow to switch to that, to learn how to integrate teams when we work remotely. I believe that periodic meetings help a lot. And I see that in Viessmann we try to do that from time to time. It's a positive thing when people are integrated and like to work with each other. Now, how to keep that when we have those teams which are remote? That's for sure an issue, and we need to think how to solve that. But other aspects, I think generally for me, it's a huge benefit when the management is fair, or you perceive management as fair people which do right decisions. That also helps you to just stay in that company because you feel confidence, and when you see issues with decisions from the management, you think you would do differently, you don't understand the decisions, then it really starts to be that spin which helps you to leave the company because you just don't see yourself in that place.
Yeah, there are mostly human relationship related things that you mentioned. Do you feel like there are also some aspects, closer to the code that could keep developers long in one project, one company?
When you come back to tech debt, yes, that when we have too much of it, for sure, it's not a thing that helps you to work and makes it, more fancy. Probably it's better to have maintainable level of tech debt because always is a bit of it. It also not exactly means that developers didn't do work well, but requirements change a bit over time. So even dependencies change. So that tech debt also can be related to the fact that you just need to change things because everything else changed around. So when you maintain that on acceptable level, then to work on that project, it's a challenge. It's okay. Then you fix those issues, improve project, and you're happy. But if there is too much of tech debt, then actually you can be frustrated. It's a completely different story, and most developers won't enjoy that. And we can see that from bugs. When you have bugs to assign to people, it's harder to find people than for stories, which have interesting new design, new things, new approaches. So I think that generally people like to implement new stuff. When they hear about maintenance, it's rather that negative factor, and we need to be aware to don't have too much of it, to don't allow the situations.
I essentially think that, like dealing with legacy systems and doing the maintenance and doing the refactoring is a skill set on its own and a mindset on its own, right? So we've covered this like today on the show as well. So respecting that system which actually built that business or earned money for that business and kind of paying the tribute back. But then again, I know that, at the company, we have a couple of interesting activities which are fostering that team building behavior. So I recall last time we were also talking about things like the internal hackathons.
Right. So I always was interested with hackathons and like to participate. Now I have that issue that I'm kind of excluded because I'm being selected to be a jury member, but also it would be nice. I have occasion to see it from other perspective. But excluding hackathons, we also have our past Scrum Master was really involved into sport. Really, he lived with that. So he organized a lot of events related to sport, but not only for our team, but also for entire office. Now he's PO from different project, but he still continues. So it's really nice that we have that people in the company who try to motivate you to work, do something different, and then meet together with team members and do something different than just discussing about work or just drinking beer. Yes, because we have a lot of sport activities, which maybe I'm not too much into that, but we have team members in the company which really are quite involved. Grzegorz, like you, for example, right?
Oh, Jarek, that was quite a nice list of aspects that could keep people on board with us. But now I feel like it's the moment for us to keep up with our tradition, because every guest is asked by us for his words of wisdom. So as a developer, what would you say to our listeners? Some kind of golden rules that you try to follow?
We tend as developers to be fast, but trying to be fast, we often do mistakes which make us slower. And I think those things can be related to architecture, that we tend to test quite new technologies. I think you have advertisements everywhere. Yes, new things, you are encouraged to buy new stuff. So when we see new technology, we just think that probably it's better because it's new. I think that's some kind of depth inside of us. So we tend to use new technologies which are fresh. Then our systems complicate, and we can have issues like, okay, it was easy to start with that technology, but now my application need to have localization for different languages. Oh my God, this framework don't support that yet because it's too new. Or I need to have some fast animations on solutions and on plugins, but they don't exist yet for that framework. So before you start, do research what technologies you should use. Yes, you should use fresh technologies, but maybe that cutting edge things which are still in beta are not the best one to start, because you can expect issues which are not resolved yet. So Stack Overflow won't help, etc. Yes, so that can be too much for you, and that will slow you down. When you work on a project, then you can think that you will be faster if you will skip testing, but always sooner or later you will have that refactors, and to refactor something without tests, even without documentation, which also can be speeding factor. Yes, to don't document thing. We change so much, we can just work without documentation. Yes, most things people can think. But then you refactor something, and who knows how many things you broke, and you have no tests even to verify that. So maybe you can commit and push, but probably if you have some tests, that will come back from testers. If not, then it will come back from users and entire project, and the reputation can be affected because of that. So I think key rule is, when you try to select faster solutions, just think a bit if you won't pay too much for that being faster today, because you can be much slower tomorrow. So I think that's the most important, and I always try when I work to do things today in a way to make tomorrow a bit easier. That of course taxes my work because I need to think a bit more, but also I believe that it helps later, and even other developers which try also to see my code, etc. They rather won't find random solutions which were copy-paste from the internet. They will find solutions which I thought a lot about, maybe even too much sometimes. So at that time, I was ensured that they are the best solutions I could do at the moment.
And in regards to expanding your knowledge, where Jarek is doing the reading and watching, what do you read? What do you watch? What would you recommend for our listeners to take a look at, take a read through in order to improve?
Okay, so I think this is the area when I'm not the best, because it's hard for me to give exact sources, because I prefer to learn by experience. So I mean, always when I try new stuff, I use technical official documentation. So firstly, idea is to learn exactly what authors of tools you use want to present you. So if it's related to Android framework and solutions, which I normally use for development of mobile Android applications, which is my daily work, then I read official documentations from Google. When I need something related to programming languages like Kotlin, yes, then I also JetBrains delivers that official documentations as an author of the language. There are some books which I read, but they are then mostly related to architecture. So here also I won't be probably, it won't be new for most of you. Personally, I like a style of Robert C. Martin, also known as Uncle Bob, and his Clean Code or Clean Architecture. Those books are written in that language is easy it's easy to read that books from end to end, at least for me, because they are maybe not so technical, even if technical subjects are discussed. So I really enjoy them. And for me, that's enough. I really like to get knowledge by experience. So when I design something, then I observe, and I like long-running projects. Then you can really observe how the architecture behaves, because many developers who start career, they mostly think that it's important to select a framework which we'll use for our work. For me, it's important to design that solution, which when you hear about requirements and then you look into implementation from high level, then somehow it represents that requirements. It might be completely not related to any framework or even language, because it's not important. That frameworks even make things harder, because then you need to think how to solve your problem, but also fit to the framework. When you forget about frameworks, just read requirements and domain knowledge, then you try to build objects which represent those problems, those objects from your domain. And then you need to think, when you have that core, how to connect it with rest of the operating system APIs. Then you can have some frameworks. But as you see, I try to searching knowledge inside of me, not because you won't find that solutions in Stack Overflow, because you can find that solutions for easy problems, how to use some APIs on the internet, but it's hard to find solutions for exact business problems which you have in your company, in your project.
Jarek, it's time to tell all of us how we can reach you over the internet, most probably, or with other medias.
I have my webpage, which is appsisle.com. It's probably hard to write from my pronunciation, so I believe it will be also linked to the descriptions of the podcast. Also on LinkedIn, when you have LinkedIn/in/soft developer, then you will find me. I had that opportunity to secure one of easiest to be remembered.
Obviously, all the links to webpage of Jarek and his LinkedIn page and other resources will be in the episode description. And at this point, we want to thank you, Jarek, for participating in our podcast, for being our guest. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. Also for me, it was quite interesting experience. I didn't do such stuff before, so I didn't attend to podcasts. I didn't create my own, so yet maybe we will see. But thank you for that opportunity and for inviting me.
We hope to see you next time in another episode. We even have some ideas for them. To our listeners, thank you for being here and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's all for today. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Visit our page on Facebook and Twitter, leave us a comment under the episode, subscribe to the updates, and share it with others.
We would like to hear your feedback so that we can prepare more interesting content for you to enjoy. Hear you next time!